Welcome to NTD Good Morning.
Here are today's top stories. The White House pushing back as Democratic officials in Illinois and Oregon intensify their efforts to block President Trump's National Guard deployments. And what the president tells NTD amid a surge in attacks on ICE agents across the country.
It's day 7 of the government shutdown. Staffing shortages at airports are causing delays. President Trump says he's talking to Democrats about health care. We have the latest.
Tariffs and trade are expected to be key points of discussion as President Trump is set to meet Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney today.
Senate Republicans are saying the FBI under former President Biden spied on at least 8 senators. What they're alleging about the operation.
8 months have passed since President Trump returned to the White House. The timeline of key events in the Middle East since then and the progress Trump has made so far.
And a supermoon lit up the night sky last night across the world as folks headed out to take a look at the dazzling spectacle in the sky.
This is NTD Good Morning. Live from our global headquarters in New York City, here are Stephanie Cox and Carrie Dunst.
Good morning. Thanks for joining us.
Today is Tuesday, October 7th. You're watching NTD Good Morning. In today's top news, President Trump defending his deployment of National Guard troops to Chicago and Portland as a legal battle unfolds.
He tells NTD that attacks on ICE officers are part of a criminal insurrection and will face severe consequences. NTD's White House correspondent Iris Tao brings us the update.
And President Trump told NTD on Monday that he believes that the rampant attacks on ICE agents in cities like Chicago are part of a criminal insurrection and that these attackers will be severely punished. He also defends his deployment of National Guard troops to cities like Chicago and Portland, saying that he has no choice but to save these cities. Secretary Noem saying that some of these attackers are actually organized and they're planning to kill and ambush these officers. What are the consequences for these?
Very severe. We're going to have very severe. We're going to find out who's going after our federal agents, whether it's National Guard or the military or anybody. I mean, if women raped and beaten and knocked to hell, and the same with men where they're being shot all over the place in large numbers, it's going to be lost if you don't do it. We have no choice but to do this.
A legal showdown is unfolding as Democratic officials in Oregon and Illinois sue the Trump administration over its order to deploy National Guard troops to their cities. A judge on Sunday blocked the administration's deployment of National Guard troops from other states to Portland. But the administration has filed an emergency appeal seeking to proceed with the deployment and insisting that the president does have the authority to send the troops in. And meanwhile, as we're seeing a surge in attacks on ICE, including a shooting in Dallas targeting an ICE facility, as well as just this past weekend in Chicago, where 10 cars were zoning in on ICE agents and another car was trying to ram into an ICE vehicle. A White House Deputy Chief of Staff Stephen Miller told NTD that he believes such attacks are part of organized domestic terrorism. To what extent does the administration believe that such attacks are organized?
Look, as I've said repeatedly, this is organized domestic terrorism. So when you have a 10-car ramming attack with armed attackers clearly intending to murder ICE officers in the conduct of their duties, what else can you call that?
And President Trump says he will invoke the Insurrection Act if judges and local officials continue holding up and impeding administration's efforts in making these cities safe. Reporting from the White House, Iris Tao, NTD News.
Great report there from Iris. Good to see her up here with us again. Next, Chicago Mayor Brandon Johnson has signed an executive order declaring city property off limits to federal immigration agents. According to Johnson, the creation of a so-called ICE-free zone is meant to protect residents' constitutional rights.
But a spokesperson for Homeland Security said the mayor's order would lead to violence against the ICE agents.
Looking now at the legal battles over recent National Guard deployments to various locations around the country, where the Trump administration's actions are raising legal questions about the balance of power between state and federal authorities. And we're joined to discuss this all by former federal prosecutor Zach Smith, who's now a legal fellow with the Heritage Foundation. Zach, good to have you with us this morning. Illinois filed a lawsuit yesterday to try to stop federalized National Guard troops from going to Chicago. And federal judge on Sunday blocked the administration from doing the same in Portland, Oregon, though we are seeing that the Texas National Guard has been allowed for the moment to head to Illinois. So there's a lot going on in play right at this moment. But lay out for us the concerns presented by the plaintiffs.
Well, look, essentially the state of Oregon, the city of Chicago, others who oppose the president's actions are saying that he doesn't have the legal authority to federalize the National Guard and then deploy them to Oregon, Chicago, and other hot spots around the country. And that is clearly wrong. The president clearly has the authority to do this. But I think we need to focus on why the president is even having to do this. Part of the reason the president is having to federalize National Guard troops, deploy them to Portland, Oregon, Chicago, Illinois, is because the local police there are refusing to assist ICE officers in protecting federal property, in making arrests when those ICE officers are attacked. And so the president, the federal government, really has no choice but to surge federal resources to those cities to make sure that the federal agents, the federal government, can effectively carry out immigration and other enforcement actions in those cities as well.
And so, Zach, this points to such an interesting conundrum here because some folks, including some officials at the state level, are saying that and even the judge in one of the cases we're looking at here for Portland is saying that the current situation could be dealt with regular law enforcement, that the situation on the ground does not justify the level of law enforcement as it pertains to federalizing law enforcement there. But you're saying that it does justify it. So I wonder what the law says. Is there any delineation here that can just plainly lay out in what circumstances it's required or justified and in what circumstances it's not?
Well, let's stop and think about that for a minute. Who gets to decide? Who is better positioned to determine whether, in fact, federal law enforcement officers are able to effectively carry out their duties on the ground? Is it the President of the United States, who the Constitution vests with the executive power, the power to enforce federal laws around the United States? Or is it a single federal district court judge, who, by the way, can sometimes issue conflicting orders with other federal district court judges around the country? And so what's very troubling about this ruling out of Portland, Oregon, and many other similar rulings is that essentially you have federal judges trying to second guess the president's factual determinations, essentially asserting for themselves the power to make certain law enforcement actions, the power to make certain military-related actions, when the Constitution clearly vests that type of power with the president. But look, it is uncontroversial and uncontroverted that the president has the power to deploy federalized National Guard troops, has the power to deploy active duty military if necessary, to protect federal agents and to assist those federal agents in carrying out their duties. And I think if anyone has seen the scenes from around the courthouse in Portland, Oregon, if they've seen the scenes in Chicago of agents being rammed, it's clear that those federal agents need additional resources, need additional help in protecting themselves and then also in protecting them while they carry out their duties. There is a federal statute that gives the president the power to federalize and then deploy National Guard troops in certain instances, and I think the administration is on a strong footing in that regard. The last thing I'll quickly say is keep in mind too, when the president's deployment of National Guard troops to Los Angeles was challenged, the federal district court judge there issued a similar ruling initially saying that he didn't have the power to do that, he couldn't do that, and a higher court stepped in, put that ruling on hold, and allowed the president to continue his deployment of troops in LA while that litigation continued.
And in terms of the recent move that the judge in Chicago is at least putting a stay on the block on President Trump being able to send Texan troops, National Guard troops there, could that decision have any impact on any of the other similar actions around the nation?
Well, look, I think we're learning that judges, unfortunately, haven't been as careful tailoring their orders as well as they should be to fit the circumstances. But look, it shouldn't really matter whether the president is sending in federalized National Guard troops from whatever state those troops may be from, if he's sending in active duty troops. The fundamental question is, does the president have the power to deploy troops to protect federal agents when local and state law enforcement refuses to do so? And again, I think the answer to that question is certainly yes.
And by law, Congress does have limits on president's ability to federalize the National Guard, but they just require that there's either an invasion, rebellion, or danger of rebellion, or the inability by the president to execute the law with regular forces. So all of these questions are at play, but it's really interesting to have your legal analysis here. That's about all we have time for, and I would love to speak more with you, but thank you so much for your time today. Zach Smith, as always, good to have your insights.
Thanks for having me on. Take care.
Back on day 7 of the government shutdown, staffing shortages, as I mentioned earlier, at airports causing delays. And President Trump says he's talking to Democrats about health care. That's a demand that they have to reopen the government. NTD's Melina Wisecup reports.
As we enter the 7th day of a government shutdown, an increasing number of air traffic controllers have called in sick, causing delays at airports.
In regard to controllers, yeah, there's controllers that have called out sick. So we're tracking it, and I don't have a continual problem in one area, right? There's been, one facility one day, another facility another day. Some areas there's been a 50% reduction in some of the staffing.
While controllers are deemed critical staff, there is no guarantee that they will get their next paycheck on October 14th. One airport expected to be closed down completely today. With no one in the towers, a number of flights at Hollywood at Burbank Airport were delayed or canceled on Monday.
We do not have the luxury of time. We do not have time to waste on the unnecessary distractions created by this shutdown. So our message is clear: end the shutdown.
On Capitol Hill Monday, senators again failed to pass a resolution to fund the government. Democrats and Republicans remain headstrong on their positions.
There's nothing for us to negotiate or to debate right now, because the House already did that. The House did its job. We passed our bill. We did the job to keep the government open, and now it's on the Senate Democrats.
Democrats, we're standing up for all these health care programs, for Medicare, Medicaid, NIH, for the Affordable Care Act, for the protection for the premiums and the health care of every single American in our country.
President Trump says he's talking with Democrats on health care, though he wouldn't say specifically who the White House is negotiating with, a statement Democrat leaders dismissed.
We have a negotiation going on right now with the Democrats that could lead to very good things.
What kind of
and I'm talking about good things with regard to health care.
Are you speaking with Democratic leaders? What kind of negotiations?
Well, I don't want to say that.
Do you know what Donald Trump was referring to when he said he'd been speaking with some Democrats?
They later, as I understand it, he has not been speaking to any Democrats.
Only 5 more Senate Democrats are needed to join on the Republicans' bill to fund the government through November. The Senate plans to continue voting, Republicans hopeful that the repeated votes will pressure rank-and-file Democrats to fold. Reporting from Washington, D.C., Melina Wisecup, NTD News.
And joining us now for analysis on the shutdown and potential layoffs are Jason Sorens. He's a senior research fellow at the American Institute for Economic Research. Also with us, NTD News contributor Mike Leon, who's host of the podcast Can We Please Talk? Gentlemen, thank you for joining. Jason, kicking off with you, your view on the Trump administration reducing the size of the federal workforce during the shutdown. Is that going to happen?
They've certainly talked about it, and this is one way that they could gain some leverage in these negotiations, because presumably Democrats aren't going to want that. But the federal workforce is bloated. There are a number of agencies that are overstaffed. There are employees that they know that they've had difficulty getting rid of, who are not performing up to par. If you look at the federal government, they let go far less than 1% of their workforce every year, whereas in the private sector, that's about 5%. So we know that lots of inefficient, unproductive workers are being held onto the federal payroll. And this is an opportunity now for these agencies to right size, to get rid of their less productive workers.
Yeah, comparing the government to the free markets in that 1%, 5% number is quite interesting. I hadn't heard that before. Mike, your thoughts, are layoffs coming?
Yeah, layoffs are coming. I mean, I've been speaking to a few government employees right now that are currently furloughed, some that work for the National Park Service, and it's in limbo. I mean, the package kind of played it, Carrie, as before we came on here, in terms of there are critical workers that are going to be working without pay. The pay period's coming up for some on October 14th. We need some of those folks like air traffic controllers and some other critical folks. But then to Jason's point, like there are folks that work in current agencies right now that, let's be honest, we could eliminate redundancies. That's always the common phrase that you hear in the private sector. The federal government has tried to do that at several different instances. It hasn't done it to the biggest success. The Cato Institute back in 2025, earlier this year in April, did a survey or study. And, over 83% of Democrats in that survey wanted cuts at the federal level. 9 in 10 Americans think we spend too much money. The federal government spends too much money. So there's unified numbers behind the government spending and what we need to rein in. And in terms of the government being inefficient and bloated, how we accomplish that, do we take a hatchet to it or do we take a scalpel to it? Those are always the debates. But the shutdown is causing a lot of panic right now, for sure.
And to Mike's point, Jason, what type of processes will be used? I mean, it's, the scalpel versus the hatchet kind of analogy, but are processes in place to carry out these reduction in force?
It's really up to the agency heads. So ultimately the appointed cabinet members in President Trump's cabinet, they can draw up plans for their departments and send this down the line and order supervisors to make lists of their most productive and least productive workers. And then this is part of what the executive branch can do as part of its duty to faithfully execute the laws. It can determine how to do that and determine that, that it has redundancies and it can do its job more efficiently with fewer workers. So that is something that, will take some time to actually execute. So we'll have to see if the shutdown lasts long enough for that to happen. But it's something really that the executive branch should be doing anyway. It's something that they started doing with the U.S. DOJ service, going in and looking at contracts and opening these things up. And that was new information for these agencies, but it's ultimately up to these individual departments to determine where their force reductions and contract cancellations and things like that could occur.
Yeah, and Mike, let's now shift over to the impact that the shutdown is having. We just saw the impact on the transportation industry with Burbank Airport closed and a lot of disgruntled federal workers who are expected to report without pay and then get the back pay when the shutdown is over. Some of them are just calling in sick, and a lot of them are critical workers. What's your take on how things are playing out right now?
Perfect, because I'm getting on a flight next week. I can't wait, Carrie. Look, I mean, this is part of it, right, Carrie? I think the package that played before we came on really examined the trickle-down effects that I think people don't understand, right? Whether it be at NIH, at Department of Defense, at State Department, cuts that are going to be made. And this is part and parcel of, like, I was talking to somebody recently about the DOJ cuts, for example, and what DOJ did. I think I gave the example here before too, but, a policy person understands something, but when you cut that person and the knowledge transfer is not done, and then DOJ says, well, we found something and here's the savings part of it, and then they've got to go back and rectify that mistake, that's where the cuts is the scalpel example, not the hatchet. And I think, I don't know about you, Carrie, I don't like working without getting paid, at least not for too long. And so right now, the impact is really a lot of workers are going out there. They know for all intent and purpose, some of the non-essential workers that I've talked to, once this happened, they knew they were going to be furloughed. They've been through this process before. Maybe they've worked in government before. We had a shutdown back in 2018 that lasted 35 days. So they've been through this process before. You save a little bit. But a lot of these government workers are living paycheck to paycheck according to data. So the problem is going to be how do we get, whether it be Senate Democrats, Mike Johnson just said in that package before that our job is done. Your job is not done, sir, unfortunately. There needs to be some negotiation process because there needs to be an understanding that there are people that are critical to the services that we rely on, whether it be transportation or whether it be health and human services. There are people that are mission critical that are working without getting paid. That's why we need to come to the negotiating table and figure this out.
Yeah, and Jason, to Mike's point, is there any estimates on what the blowback or impact or trickle-down effect is from people who can't float mortgage and rent, and then the bank has to deal with that, and it just sort of trickles into the economy? Any understandings on what that impact could look like?
Well, it will certainly disrupt consumption from certain federal workers who are not getting paid. But the American economy is much larger than that, and so I don't think it's going to affect the broader economy, but it will certainly affect those workers. And we do have to understand that shutdowns are kind of a stupid way for DC to go about business, because there's so much waste involved when you shut down the government, because you're not saving money. In fact, you're spending more money because these people will have to be paid eventually, and then maybe to fulfill those critical services, maybe you're having to use contractors and things like that. So there is a bill in Congress, a Republican-sponsored bill actually, that would end government shutdowns, and instead, if Congress can't pass a budget or a continuing resolution, you would simply level fund the government going forward. My view is that would be a positive thing. I think a lot of federal workers would agree with that. But at the same time, if Democrats are going to force this shutdown to try to get their healthcare policy demands, it's up to the Republicans and the executive branch to decide how to deal with that. And this could be an opportunity to start to put some political pressure on them to end the shutdown.
Well, we do have to wrap it up here, but you bring up an interesting point. Shutdown is certainly a lose-lose proposition, and hopefully cooler heads will prevail, and we'll get the government churning again. Jason Sorens, Mike Leon, thank you for joining me this morning.
Thank you.
Still to come, a Senate committee says the FBI under former President Biden spied on Republican senators as part of a January 6th probe.
Senate Republicans are saying the Biden administration weaponized the FBI.
And authorities are investigating a helicopter crash on a Sacramento highway. 3 people are critically injured. More on that coming soon. Welcome back to NTD Good Morning. Tariffs are expected to be a key point of discussion as President Trump meets Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney today.
NTD's Daniel Monahan has more on Carney's trip to the White House and other top tariff updates.
President Trump says he expects Prime Minister Mark Carney to bring up tariffs when he visits the White House today.
Well, I guess he's going to ask about tariffs because a lot of companies from Canada are moving into the United States,
Trump says an increasing number of Canadian companies are relocating to the United States thanks to his moves on tariffs.
They left here 20 years ago when presidents that sat right at this desk weren't doing their job properly. They were probably good politicians, but they weren't good at business, and they allowed these companies to leave.
The Prime Minister's office has said the two leaders will focus on the economic and security relationship between the two countries during the meeting. Trump recently ramped up tariffs on Canadian products not covered by the U.S.-Mexico-Canada agreement to 35%. But the Carney government has said Canada still has the best tariff rate compared to other countries, since the vast majority of Canadian products are exempt under the agreement. Meanwhile, Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre has criticized Carney for not getting what he described as a win from the United States after half a year in office. Hundreds of billions of dollars have flowed into the Treasury in tariffs since April. President Trump has floated the idea of distributing part of the revenue back to Americans in rebate checks.
To your second point about the tariff rebates, I think it's an idea that the president has discussed and floated with his team of advisors, but no decision has been firmly made at this point in time.
Trump's use of tariffs to restore fair trade relations between the United States and the rest of the world will soon be heard by the Supreme Court. The High Court will hear arguments on whether the president can use emergency powers to issue the tariffs at all. More tariff news. President Trump announced Monday that all medium and heavy-duty trucks entering the United States will see a 25% tariff starting on November 1st. Late last month, Trump said he was imposing a 25% tariff on all heavy trucks made abroad, starting on October 1st, citing national security concerns. He said the move was aimed at protecting American truck manufacturers such as Peterbilt, Kenworth, Freightliner, and Mack Trucks. Daniel Monahan, NTD News.
8 months have passed since President Trump returned to office. Much of his focus has been on working to bring peace to the Middle East.
Today, on the second anniversary of the October 7th attacks, we want to go back and see what efforts have been made so far. Here's the timeline.
So help me God. Congratulations, Mr. President.
Much has changed in the Middle East since President Trump was inaugurated for the second time in January. One of the administration's goals has been to stop the fighting between Israel and Hamas terrorists, as was highlighted during Trump's inauguration.
Pray that the next 4 years brings peace to Israel and throughout the Middle East.
People in Gaza were cheerful a day before Trump returned to office, as Israel and Hamas had agreed to a ceasefire. Many Trump supporters at the time said Hamas accepted the truce due to Trump's anticipated return and his strong stance on the Gaza conflict. In early February, Hamas released 3 hostages in a highly televised event. Israel later released Palestinian prisoners. The swaps are part of the ceasefire agreements between the two sides. Many criticized the early hostage releases by Hamas, saying they were not safe as the captives were surrounded and swarmed by thousands of people, many of them armed. Israel also withdrew from the Netzarim corridor in Gaza. This allowed thousands of displaced Palestinians to move back to the northern part of the Gaza Strip. But the ceasefire ended after 2 months on March 18th after Israel hit targets in the Palestinian enclave. The Israeli military said the strikes were necessary due to reorganization by Hamas, which would have ended up hurting Israel. As spring progressed, the Iranian regime got involved more and more in the fighting against Israel. The Jewish state retaliated, striking military targets in Tehran, which forced some Iranian civilians to flee the city. The escalations led to the U.S. sending stealth bombers to Iran, striking 3 nuclear sites in late June. The pilots took off from the U.S., flew across the globe to Iran, hit the targets, and returned to the U.S.
Tonight I can report to the world that the strikes were a spectacular military success.
The attacks on Iran's nuclear sites stopped the direct fighting between Israel and Iran, bringing an end to what is now known as the 12-Day War. And now, on October 7, 2025, 2 years after the attacks, peace in the Middle East might be closer than ever before. President Trump unveiled a 20-point peace plan during a meeting with Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu in late September.
If we work together, we can bring an end to the death and destruction that we've seen for so many years, decades, even centuries.
Some of the key points of the plan are the withdrawal of Israeli forces to an agreed-upon line, the release of all Israeli hostages, the release of Palestinian prisoners, and a major surge of aid into Gaza. Israel agreed to the plan on the day Trump presented it. Hamas agreed to some of the points last Friday, including the release of all hostages, dead or alive, but has not agreed to disarm or give up a role in governing Gaza in the future. Just on Monday, European leaders said the first phase of the plan could be implemented as soon as this week, potentially pausing the fighting in Gaza and Israel.
And President Trump is planning to meet with Adnan Alexander today, the American who was held hostage by Hamas for 584 days and believed to be the last surviving U.S. hostage. Meanwhile, high-stakes talks between Israel and the Hamas terror group enter their second day today.
And Senate Republicans say the FBI spied on 8 senators during Special Counsel Jack Smith's investigation into the January 6 Capitol breach. Senate Judiciary Chair Chuck Grassley said the FBI accessed the senators' phone records. Here are the details.
Senate Judiciary Chair Chuck Grassley said his investigation uncovered proof that the FBI under the Biden administration accessed the private phone records of 8 Republican senators. This was allegedly during Special Counsel Jack Smith's Arctic Frost probe into the events of January 6, 2021. He called it a case of political weaponization worse than Watergate. Grassley released a redacted FBI document dated September 27, 2023. The file lists several Republican senators, including Lindsey Graham, Marsha Blackburn, and Ron Johnson, under a section labeled Preliminary Toll Analysis. Grassley says his committee has found no legal justification for the FBI's actions and believes the effort reflects political targeting of Republican lawmakers.
There's no predicate that we can find for the solicitation of these telephone records, which I think emphasizes the political weaponization that was behind all this effort.
Other Republican senators named in the document are backing Grassley's call for accountability.
This memo was dated September of 2023. To put it all into context, the Mar-a-Lago raid occurred in August of 2022. Jack Smith announced the indictments against President Trump in August of 2023. So this is almost 2 months later. This doesn't surprise me, but it should shock every American.
Senator Marsha Blackburn of Tennessee says the FBI's actions were politically motivated.
No cause, no reason, no predicate, other than all Republicans and all very supportive of President Trump.
President Trump also weighed in. Speaking to Newsmax Monday, he described Special Counsel Jack Smith's actions as an abuse of power.
What he did to the lives of so many people, and he tried on me, this guy was a bad guy. And you know, the reason he lost is because he went too far. When you go too far, sometimes you get away with it, but they didn't get away with it here.
FBI Director Kash Patel said agents accessed lawmakers' phone data for political purposes. He said the abuse of power ends now and vowed the Bureau will never again be weaponized against the American people. Grassley says his committee will continue investigating what he calls abuses by the FBI through the Biden White House.
Here's some of today's top headlines. President Trump told NTD yesterday that he believes the attacks on ICE agents are part of a criminal insurrection and their actions will be severely punished. There has been an increase in attacks on ICE, including the recent shooting at a Dallas facility. The president is also facing a legal showdown over his deployment of the National Guard troops to cities like Chicago and Portland. Trump defended the action, saying he has no choice but to save these cities. And it's day 7 of a government shutdown. U.S. airports are reporting delays as an increasing number of air traffic controllers have called in sick. The essential workers are expected to be at work but aren't guaranteed a timely paycheck. Senators aren't making progress in getting a funding bill across the finish line. Another 2 votes failed yesterday. Meanwhile, President Trump says he's open to the right deal on health care, and he is speaking with Democrats. However, Democratic leaders are calling Trump's comments interesting, as they say they have no knowledge of the talks. And Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney is expected to visit the White House today in a meeting with President Trump. The Prime Minister's office has said the two leaders will focus on the economic and security relationship between the two countries during the meeting, including Trump's tariffs. Trump recently ramped up the tariffs on Canadian products not covered by the U.S.-Mexico-Canada agreement, up to 35%. Trump's use of tariffs will be heard by the Supreme Court soon to determine whether the president can use these emergency powers to issue tariffs in the first place. And Senate Republicans accuse the FBI of spying on lawmakers during Special Counsel Jack Smith's January 6th probe. Senate Judiciary Chair Chuck Grassley says his committee uncovered evidence the Bureau under President Biden accessed the phone records of 8 GOP senators. Grassley released a redacted FBI file listing senators, including himself, Lindsey Graham, as well as Ron Johnson. Those are this morning's top headlines. With that, Steph, over to you.
Thanks, Carrie. Next, a federal appeals court will consider whether Louisiana's 10 Commandments classroom law violates the First Amendment. The measure, known as House Bill 71, required every public school classroom to display the 10 Commandments. In June, a panel of judges unanimously found the law plainly unconstitutional, citing a 1980 Supreme Court ruling that blocked a similar Kentucky law. Louisiana officials argue the Supreme Court has since narrowed that precedent and that the displays reflect America's founding principles. Attorney General Liz Murrill praised the court's decision to rehear the case. She had previously said that she was willing to take it all the way to the U.S. Supreme Court. We'll be keeping you updated. Next, President Trump says he's reviving a long-stalled mining project in Alaska. The move reopens a major debate over jobs, energy, and environmental protection in the Alaskan wilderness.
We have a very big signing today having to do with Alaska, a place that I'm very familiar with. And we're making it greater, bigger, and more powerful, and job producing. It's an economic gold mine, so to speak. And I signed this years ago, and Biden unsigned it for me.
Trump yesterday signed an executive order allowing construction of a 200-mile road to Alaska's Ambler mining district, which he says unlocks access to copper and other critical minerals. The decision reverses, as you just heard, the Biden administration's rejection of that road. Biden's Interior Department had cited threats to fish and caribou populations vital to many Native communities. Interior Secretary Doug Burgum said the project would unlock minerals needed to win the artificial intelligence arms race against China. Supporters say the road will bring jobs and revenue to Alaska while providing minerals used in cars, electronics, and renewable energy production. Opponents, including dozens of Alaskan Native tribes, warned that development would endanger traditional hunting and fishing grounds. And California voters are weighing a high-stakes redistricting plan that could reshape the balance of power in Congress ahead of the 2026 midterms.
The plan, known as Prop 50, would give redistricting power to the legislator instead of the state's independent commission.
Governor Gavin Newsom is leading the campaign for passage, pushing the plan as critical to keeping Republicans from full control in Washington. He argues the measure is critical to limiting Trump's influence in the second half of his term.
The plan is intended to offset Trump's moves in Texas to gain 5 Republican districts ahead of the midterms.
Republicans, led by former Governor Arnold Schwarzenegger, argue the plan is a step backwards and would undermine democracy.
Voting is already underway, and results will be decided when ballots are counted on November 4th.
A huge supermoon lit up the night sky in cities across the world last night. This year's sighting lines up with the Mid-Autumn Festival, also called the Moon Festival.
It's a day of celebration and reunion celebrated by ethnic Chinese across the world.
In the beginning, I thought because today is the Moon Festival, and it also coincides with the supermoon, we live at the foot of the hill where we could already see the moon. I thought that the view up here would be much better than down there. In the end, after coming up here, we saw that the moon is really very big and full, really over my expectations.
It is clear that nature calls us to understand it and protect it. The moon has always accompanied human development, and observing it helped people organize time for planting and harvesting, plan travel, and measure time itself.
A full moon is classified as supermoon when it reaches its nearest point to Earth in its orbit. This full moon, also known as the harvest moon, it's a name given to a full moon that appears closest to the fall equinox, and it reached its peak overnight.
And according to NASA, the harvest moon can appear to be 30% brighter and up to 14% larger than a typical full moon.
And it was quite the sight to see. I actually saw it about 3 a.m. this morning. I think you can still call that last night. It was quite beautiful.
Technically no, but we'll go with that. Yeah, you're right.
yeah, to look up at the sky. I mean, I recommend just look up at the sky every night if you can.
Yeah, no, in particular, the harvest moon, you know, it's the moon that happens just after the equinox, and that's why you get that angle where the Earth is tilted a certain way, where you get get almost equal amounts of daylight and darkness, and that's the moon that comes right as people are bringing in all the fruits and veggies. So that's the name, the harvest moon. You could work all through the night because you had that light source to see what you were doing.
Little piece of history there, history in the making. All right, well, if you don't take the elevator, it's 686 steps to climb the Eiffel Tower. A French mountain biker made it to the top of the monument the hard way by pedaling and doing so in record time.
NTD's international correspondent David Vives has the details.
The last steps were the hardest.
Yes! Paris witnessed a breathtaking feat on Thursday as Aurélien Fontenoy, triple vice world champion in mountain bike trial, climbed the Eiffel Tower 686 steps on his bike in record time. The French rider reached the second floor of the iconic monument in just 12 minutes and 30 seconds, without once putting a foot on the ground.
Hard, but I'm so happy with the outcome. I didn't think I would do it that fast. My goal was to beat the record, so I'm really happy. It really pulls on the shoulders and on the legs. The second section was really tough because you can't pedal at all. The brakes are on the whole time and you just have to keep hoping.
Fontenoy's 8-kilogram saddle-free bike was specially designed to handle extreme obstacles. The Eiffel Tower has long served as a stage for daring performances, from roller jumps to tightrope walks.
The Eiffel Tower is the best monument to climb by stairs in France. It's a great symbol, too.
The attempt, held before the tower opened to the public, was part of his ongoing project, The Climb, which has seen him tackle skyscrapers and towers across Europe. David Vives, NTD News, Paris.
Such an interesting use of one's bike. You know, he's not, the sport he does is not classic mountain biking where you're just riding through the woods or the trails or the red rock. Mountain biking trials are actually when it involves a rider to pass through an obstacle course while never touching the ground and staying on the bike. So he's especially trained in the art of hopping around on his bike. I wouldn't really call that classic mountain biking, though, in the typical sense, but such a cool use of the bike and on one of the most iconic monuments in the world.
That's it, and there's quite a bit of skill involved. You've got to apparently lift the front of the wheel over the first step, shift the weight forward to guide the front wheel, and then maintain momentum by pedaling to bring the rear wheel up over the subsequent steps. And of course, the bike itself has to be specific dimensions and all that to make this work. And especially in such a situation where the perimeters are so tight.
Indeed, and all the while he has to keep his brakes on because otherwise he'll just roll backwards because he's sitting on two wheels. So he said, his shoulders were hurting because he had to kind of do this the whole way up.
Well, everybody's got their hobby. It's nice to see what you can achieve.
Kudos to him. Fantastic work. Great.
Well, that's all we've got time for now, but stay with us. We've got plenty more coming up. Alice Tong at 10 a.m. And
we'll be back shortly right after this break.
That's right.
Stay with us.